Well, in 24 hours since Joe Biden beat President Donald Trump in the race for the White House, the president-elect is still preaching unity while the incumbent maintains the election was stolen from him. Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will be sworn into office in January. Trump spent most of the week claiming election irregularities helped the pair edge ahead of him, but the claims are being largely dismissed as baseless. Let's discuss the situation in Washington with Wits University's Professor Daryl, Glaser, who is joining us by Skype from Johannesburg tonight, I believe. Prof, good to have your time. So what does the drama with Trump still not conceding defeat, as well as the allegations about electoral fraud, tell us about what has for years been touted as one of, if not the best or greatest democracy in the world?
Well, I think people who have been observing American democracy closely have been aware of flaws in American democracy for some time. I mean, some of us are definitely old enough to remember, for example, the 2000 election, which was finally resolved in the American Supreme Court in December of that year after an incredibly close and controversial contest between Bush and Gore in the state of Florida. So whether it's the voting methods or whether it's the electoral system, American democracy, many of the foundations of which were laid more than 2 centuries ago, often no longer looks fit for purpose, despite America lecturing others about democracy. But look, we have seen a very powerful incumbent successfully challenged at the polls, and Donald Trump, who has been defeated, has provided no convincing evidence of large-scale fraud. It looks like the machinery of transition in the United States is underway. There are leaders around the world, including some close Trump allies, who've now congratulated Biden on his victory. So it looks as though it's a rather forlorn rearguard action on Trump's part.
And while all of this is happening, Joe Biden, in his victory speech last night, was still calling for the lowering of temperatures. But that's clearly not going to happen, because just in the last hour, in fact 2 hours ago, Donald Trump, the incumbent, was still tweeting that this was, in effect, a stolen election. So what is it going to take to get to those lowered tensions or temperatures in the United States?
Yeah. Look, let me first say that Donald Trump has been signaling his belief that any election he loses in any respect is fraudulent. By definition, for Donald Trump, if he doesn't win, the election's a fraud. So even in the election of 2016, which he won in the Electoral College, he claimed that the election was a fraud because he didn't win the popular vote. But you know, we're in a situation now where because American democratic stability has been so challenged by this kind of bellicose populism, although you've got these calls for unity, the mood of the country is fragile, and the country is very divided. So there are some who are celebrating. There are many, probably a majority of Americans now celebrating Biden's victory for different reasons. Some are hoping that he's going to be a unifying force. Some of his progressive supporters hope they can push the moderate Biden to the left. And these different agendas are going to be playing out. We're going to see which way Biden tilts as he puts together his cabinet and his transition team. But there's no doubt that part of Biden's appeal was that he was not the divisive and belligerent Donald Trump, but he comes across as a more decent, socially responsible, unifying figure.
And just on that, Prof, the agenda for the Biden administration, there's a long list of issues in the country currently. It was a highly emotional campaign that they all embarked on, but there's still the issue of the coronavirus pandemic, which has killed more people in the United States than anywhere else, right? There was the issue of racism, the killing of unarmed black men by police officers. Is a 4-year term for Biden and Kamala Harris going to be long enough for just those problems and the many others to be addressed sufficiently?
I think it's going to be a huge challenge for Biden to take on those really big structural issues. At the best of times, you know, very often American presidents in the American divided system of government, they'll have, say, a window of 2 years when the presidency and the two houses of Congress are all of the same party. They'll have this window in which they can push forward initiatives like Obama did with Obamacare. And it looks as though the Republicans are most likely to retain the Senate. And so you're going to have divided government, and you're potentially going to have gridlock, and the gridlock's going to be all the worse for the fact that, basically since Obama came to power, arguably since Clinton came to power in the 1990s, the Republicans have been absolutely determined to block anything that any Democratic president does. So given the divided nature of America's political picture at the moment, it's very difficult to see how Biden is going to find the leverage to push through anything very dramatic. He does have some scope with executive action. I mean, Trump did a hell of a lot by simply using the area of discretion involved to the president, allowed to the president to act unilaterally, and certainly Biden will use some of that area of discretion to push through certain changes.
And very quickly, Prof, my apologies, very quickly, Joe Biden is 78. Currently, unlikely to run for a second term just based on age alone. Kamala Harris, still much younger, very ambitious politician. Her ascent to the role of VP, historic because she's the first woman of color to take that position. But would you agree that there is more riding on the success of the Biden campaign for her career specifically, especially if she may want to, after the 4-year term, launch her own presidential campaign, because she did want to be president?
Yeah, the sound went there. I think I got the gist of your question. I hope you're hearing me and my answer.
We can still hear you clearly, Prof.
Yes, yes. So clearly this has been, Kamala Harris is both the first person of color vice president and the first woman vice president, or at the moment vice president-elect. So a very symbolically important moment. And yes, she's going to be, many would anticipate, the more viable political candidate of the two come 2024 for a presidential run. But, we don't, it's so difficult to predict what's going to happen in the next week in American politics, let alone what's going to happen 4 years later. And, there's going to be a huge scramble in both parties now to try and figure out what a post-Trump political landscape is going to look like.
Professor Daryl Glaser from Wits University, good to speak to you, sir. Thank you.